Good evening, everyone. My name is Sanford Haskell. You'll hear a little bit about my family when I work my way out Lakeshore Road. Sue spoke to me about doing this, and I said I don't do anything like this anymore. I've retired, but I'm pretty passionate about Lakeshore Road. I've been there, I guess, 70 years and a couple. Anyway, first thing I'd like to do, I'd like everyone to think about Jeff Lees. He lost his father last night or a couple nights ago. So please, everyone, pray for Jeff. It's a tough time for him. And also, I'd like to introduce, I believe, Mr. Greg Burns is a counselor in this town, from what I hear. And Louise Berry Bletcher represents Ward 2. And I think Cal Morgan is here, who used to be a counselor. I'm going to start at the top of Port Hope, which we used to call the Gravel Road Corner, where the Winchester Arms is. I'll call it the Schultz property. When I was growing up, it originally was owned by a guy by the name of Spooner. He sold it to Williams and he built those houses in there. The Schultz children, Amanda, who is here, and Henry went to Port Britain School, and had that school stayed open another 3 or 4 years, Albert Schultz would have went to that school too. So we could have claimed him as a Port Britanite. Moving along, the next big house that I'll talk about is the Wildwood, which is up off Lakeshore Road. It was a very popular house as we were growing old in this community. There was a major politician lived in there. The Brand house is the one that Charles Wickett lives in. The Brand family, I will get to them the further out the Lakeshore. They were one of the more prominent families that we had in Hope Township, and I'm going to use that term, not Ward 2. I don't like Ward 2. Amen. Amen, brother. Anyway, we'll move along. Coming out Lakeshore Road, we come to the first operating farm, which was known as Cliffshore Farm, the John Ferguson farm, Gordon before him and Old John before him. And I was speaking to my neighbor tonight, Ian Sculthorpe, when he came in. The first new tractor I remember bought from Ken Ashby Farm Equipment, which you'll hear about later, was a 1958 John Deere 60 tractor with a loader. It cost around $3,600 back in 1958. And my other neighbor north of me, Robert White, just bought a new John Deere. It cost $250,000. So we spent a little bit of an increase in farm equipment. We move along the Ferguson farm. We're coming down Lakeshore Road towards the hole in the wall. There's been 2 deaths at that corner there over the years. That road has not been kind to people on that corner. We move a little bit farther along, and maybe some of you remember taking your lawnmower to Balchericoon Molders to get it fixed, just right for the subway. And the subway, the archives have got a great picture of it, and to that place's credit, it's never had a fatality at the subway. There's been lots of accidents, trucks have got stuck in there, everything has went wrong, but nobody ever died there. We move along under the subway and we head out towards the first turn, and we come up to what used to be Victoria Dairy. That's where Victoria Dairy started, at the farm that some of us might know as Edgar Nichols. Ray Hawthorne lives there now. Victoria Dairy was purchased by the Highfield family here in Port Hope and continued on for a few years until it became Highfield's Dairy. Also, the Nicholses owned that farm, and they were very big in maple syrup, and maple syrup was a big staple back when this municipality started. You used it on your apple pie, you put it in for sweetening. It was a great product and everybody had to have some. Then we move a little bit farther along and we come to the Brand house. Now this is a major family in the municipality of Port Hope. The Brands were quite a wealthy family. They had money in England that they used to ship a boat over to bring some over for them when a couple of daughters got in trouble. Malcolm Brand was there, and that farm, the name of it was Malcolmdale, where the Brands were. And the road allowance between the Brands and which in my time was the Dickinson farm, there's a pipeline that runs from the El Dorado dump site down, and that's the only place in anywhere that we can find that there's a nuclear pipeline running under a road, and that's at Brand Road. Now just west of Brand Road was the Dickinson farm. They raised chickens and turkeys. And I don't think there's anybody here remembers all the damn turkeys running around down there. But we had them, they were white. And the name of that farm was Cream Vale, the Dickinson farm. And then you go up the hill, and I guess you come to where this old girl and I have spent about 60 years. Anyway, our farm was called Spring Willow. I'm getting ahead of myself, because there was a spring there, and when my family moved there in 1795, the reason they moved there was for a spring to make whiskey. And somewhere over on my table you'll find a book that shows where we sold whiskey. And if you want to find out if anybody lived here, just come and look at the book, you can tell. And they only sold it for medicinal purposes. At the south end of our farm is a place called Oddie Point. That is a mariner's record of the seafarers people, and that was named after Alan Oddie, who was a captain on the ship Star in the 1812 war. And we can't find out why it was named after him. My guess is, and what I've heard from family records, that that ship was here in Port Hope to protect the people of Hope Township. We moved west from our place to the next Haskell Road now. On the west side of Haskell Road was where I grew up, and that farm was Green Mountain Home, because my family came from Vermont and they were Green Mountain boys, and they named that farm Green Mountain Farm. And Councillor Fletcher owns part of it now. We made whiskey up there. The two houses, the big house up the side road was built in 1849. It cost $1,960. And the house where I lived, and there's a picture of it over there at the archives, it was built in 1850. And it cost $2,150 because my great-great-grandmother was a Gage. She came from a carpenter family from Gage's Creek. And there's a lot of updates in that house. There was a bake oven. All the stuff around the bottom, the baseboards were all upgraded. So that is the story of the Haskell family. We moved out there in 1796, and for some reason we've been able to pay the bills for 220 years. My family was a whiskey family. My grandfather got caught for bootlegging, so we got the proof in the pudding. We moved west of our place. We come to Port Britain School. It has burnt down a couple times. Recently it burnt down. It's now a private residence owned by, I guess now, Elizabeth Knox. Her sister died last week. Catherine Kingsley passed away. So we're unfortunate to lose her. But Port Britain School, there's a book there on Port Britain School, and pretty near anybody on Lakeshore Road went to Port Britain School. And I guess I forgot to say the house that Helen and I used to own and where we started out living together, I guess you'd say. Mr. Alex Retta lives in there now, and he won a Gemini Award for costume design about 4 years ago, so we do have royalty there. We move on from Port Britain School, we go west, and I'm getting into the Sculthorpe property, and I won't talk about it because they're here, and that's their job, and it's helped me out a great deal. The house, when you come to Dickinson Road, the farm on the west side was my family property in 1801 when they took it from the Crown. And it eventually got into the Greenaway family, and it was named Highland Cottage Farm. And after the Greenaway, Mr. Dickinson married a Greenaway, and somehow he got that farm in his name. And I forgot to mention the Brand Farm on the south side of the road was a clergy reserve, and they bought that, and the document that they bought it from the clergy is here on this table if anybody wants to look at it, from I believe it's 1844. They didn't pay much money for it, but every so many lots, I think it was every 15 lots, was a clergy reserve, which was from the Church of England. There was no Presbyterians or Bible Christians there. So we moved west, and we get into Port Britain. I'm not going to talk about Port Britain very much because that's where the Sculthorpes live, and they can yip about it. So I will tell you that in Port Britain, on the west side of the road going down to Port Britain Shores, there was a church, and I have I guess you'd call it a brochure or something there, where they were having a strawberry festival in 1886. So the church was there. It was a Bible Christian. It closed down, and the Bible went to Wesleyville, and the bricks out of that church went to Zion School when they built it at Zion. And going down to Port Britain, back well, I guess 1800, late 1800s, early 1900s. There was a slaughterhouse there, and Mr. Cyril Dark made sausage. He only killed pigs, but he made sausage. And everybody had to go there to get their sausages, and what I hear, they were good. I remember him just barely, but he was a very old gentleman then and wasn't in business. So, in Port Britain, I'm going to speak a little bit about it, the marshes. I was very fortunate over the years that people brought me stuff, and I received the marsh account books. They're here on this table, and I opened a page there where Robert Baldwin bought whiskey off the marshes, and I think he's a pretty known name in this province of Ontario. The marshes built ships down there at Port Britain, and they built one for my family. It was called Chloe H, because she was Chloe Gage from Gage's Creek, and they had the ship built for my family's use, and they used it till they sold it to their cousins in Rochester, New York. Now we're going through Port Britain. I'm not going to talk about that because my brothers, yes, are going to do it. We go up the hill, and Harold Reeve lived on the west side of the road, north side of the road, sorry, and he wrote the history of Hope Township, which somewhere I see a copy here. And then we'll go up to Willow Beach Road. That's a pretty famous road in this municipality. There was a lady there that kept the big house down there, which was the best house to me, but anyway, her name was Hicks, and she used to have a store there where you could buy pop and ice cream and stuff like this, and all the young fellows on the summer nights would congregate down there and I guess raise hell from what I hear. But that road, I want to tell you a little bit about rum running. When there was rum running here in Prohibition, there was probably more whiskey traveled that road than this liquor store has in stock over here right now. My family was heavily involved in that through Ben Kerr. Again, we're coming back to booze, and the Hatch family. I'm related to the Hatches, which eventually owned Gooder Works in Toronto. But that road, my father, my uncle, my grandfather used to go, the boats would come in, the pollywog that Ben Kerr owned would come into that place. They would load the whiskey and take it up to right in front of where Ian lives and load it on trucks and anything that could take it away. And that went on every night for whenever the weather was right. There was not high waves. And I guess it was somewhere in the late 1930s, when it was almost coming to an end, there was a gentleman here in town who wanted to play hockey, and he couldn't find any place to play, and somehow or another Ben Kerr owned the Hamilton Tigers in the Ontario Senior Hockey League, which in those days, if you could play senior hockey, you could play for the Leafs and probably beat them now. Anyway, there was a certain gentleman here that by the name of Bill Sherry that wanted to play. He couldn't find any place to play, and my grandfather made a phone call to Ben Kerr, and all of a sudden Mr. Sherry was on the Hamilton Tigers, and they won an Allen Cup there and a championship. I would like to speak my last thing is a little bit about a village that's vanished up at Wesleyville, a village called Crimea. It was, before Wesleyville was there, it's east of Wesleyville and north. And it had a church, a school, and what else? There was something else there. Not a post office, but anyway, that village totally vanished, and you'll see it on the map behind Councillor Fletcher there. If you want to look at it, it's one of those villages that vanished over the years, and but Wesleyville took over. And I think I'm pretty near done, Sue, but I would like to say we can prove history. We can't prove the future. Thank you.
From Vermont, like the Haskell family, about the same time. And they started Port Britain. They built, I believe, a log cabin at the lake, and then they, in I think about 1832 or so, they built the stone house. There was the Marsh Inn, so when you come down the hill into Port Britain, you'll see the large lilac trees that are on the north side of the road, and that they were in front of the original Marsh Inn. And so my understanding about the Marsh family was that they were very good at picking the best agricultural land in Hope Township, and they picked some really good farms. Jim McComb lives in a Marsh Inn on number 2 Highway. I think the McFaddens live in a Marsh home now.
We live in a Marsh home.
Another good farm, good land. So they were instrumental in Port Britain, and it was through marriage that James Sculthorpe married a Marsh, and then ended up owning the Stone House Farm, which is virtually on the east side of Port Britain. And it was the Marsh family, it was Susanna, wasn't it, Sanford, that built the crypt at the bottom of Port Britain Road on the east side of the road, and she wanted her family to be all together as they passed. And so she had the crypt built, which we call the vault. And it was built, my understanding, it was built from large ballast stones that were brought, and it was built by Kip Reeves' grandfather, and a mason from England. And so Susanna Marsh had exhumed some bodies. I never had the opportunity to go into the crypt, but Sanford has been in the crypt, and Helen Ann's been in the crypt before the crypt was looted and damaged, and my grandfather, R.E. Sculthorpe, poured a concrete plug and put a steel door on it so nobody could go in. But before that, there was a professional person that came from Montreal, and actually in the Marsh family history, that's all written about, all the bodies that were in there, how many bodies are there. I think there are 26, 24. And then there were some children that were probably put in there just after birth that didn't survive, and there are no bones left from them. But there were, I should actually let Sanford talk because he's been in there. And I haven't. But so the Sculthorpe family came later into Port Britain, and my R.E. Sculthorpe married Susanna Marsh. R.E. Sculthorpe ran the grain elevator in the Port Hope Harbor, which in probably some of these pictures and drawings of the Port Hope Harbor, the Sculthorpe family mill was there. And he was crushed when they changed the width of the rail cars. They made them wider, and R.E. could walk up and down beside the elevator, and the trains could move up and down. And he was walking, story has it, he was walking beside the elevator, and one of these wider cars came along, and he was rolled down the side of the elevator, and he didn't die immediately, he died several days after that. He was taken to his house at the top of the hill on the north side of the main street and passed away. And he had 4 children, Walker being our grandfather. He had great-grandfather. And Walker Sculthorpe got the mill in Port Britain, and so he lived there. His older sister got the Stone House Farm, Aunt Evelyn, who married a Webster in Lindsay. And just to divert from that for just a minute, Ian went to Guelph, I don't know, 8 years ago, 10 years ago, 2004. He was put in went into residence. His roommate was a Webster from Lindsay. So, how coincidental. But so Walker ran the mill in Port Britain, and Evelyn owned the stone house. There are stories about the mill, and it was taken down. I don't remember it being there, but stories from my grandfather. And it was a 3-level mill, and you can see where the all the different levels were, and the flume came through the mill pond. The mill pond was, my grandfather said when he was a boy, he kept a canoe at the corner of the pond closest to Port Britain, and he would paddle out, and the bottom of the pond is white clay. And he said the light would bounce off it, and it was about 10 feet deep, and it was crystal clear. And it was just the most magnificent mill pond. And then they moved the Grand Trunk north, and when they did that, all the runoff from the berm that runs across the valley washed down and filled the mill pond in, silted the pond in. They then drained the pond and cleared the pond out with horse and sluice buckets and built a knoll just north of my parents' house, and carried on. And then it happened again, and then the mill pond was not cleaned out again. And then I think my grandfather may have taken that mill down and used the material out of it to build a couple of different smaller barns in around that area. One being the pheasant barn, because he raised pheasants and let them go, and of course they went into everybody's vegetable gardens because they were pets and ate all the tomatoes and vegetables. Everybody was hating my grandfather for raising the chickens, and he had sheep. And Sanford's told me the story of the Haskells bringing their sheep in the spring to wash them in the bottom of the sluiceway north. They would bring the sheep down the road and wash them in the stream in the spring before they sheared. Is that yeah? Because I mean, I remember sheep on the Haskell's Hill, and I remember 2 horses at the top of that hill standing head to tail, and this magnificent elm tree under that hill. Gone now. So it's gone, but so I mean, yeah, the Lakeshore Road has been an amazing part of so many lives. You know, I've lived there for almost 62 years, and we've watched it change, but it's still the Lakeshore Road, and our community has kept it the Lakeshore Road with people like Sanford, my mom and dad, my grandfather, many other families have worked so hard to not allow the Lakeshore Road to develop the way it might. I think one of our saving graces is the hole in the wall.
Yeah, no kidding.
We can't get things through there. And I'm hoping that that bridge over the railroad tracks is so big that our municipality will never build it. We have one over it that's supposed to take golf carts, and they I don't think we'll ever see golf carts running over the top of that bridge, but you know, the Sculthorpe family, yes, we came to Port Britain. We actually came to Port Hope from New York City. James Sculthorpe married Catherine Smith from New York City, and her 2 boys, James and Elias, were christened in the Little Trinity Church, which is in Wall Street, New York. It's still there. My parents have seen the christening records of those children. They came to Port Hope, I don't know, in the middle 1790s. Catherine's younger brother built the Bluestone House in Port Hope, and several other of the Smith family built other houses. One of the 2 brothers, being Elias, was drowned in the Ganaraska River, and James Sculthorpe grew up and had a family, and so it came from one son that came to Port Hope as a little boy. So here we are. But it goes 9, 10 generations. Ian's son, Walker James Sculthorpe, is the 10th generation Sculthorpe in Port Hope, which is pretty special.
That is special. Really. I think there's a McFadden who might like to say a few words. No?
My wife Deanne and I had been married for 2 years, and we wanted to live in the country, and we were on our way to Colborne to visit Deanne's grandmother, and we didn't want to drop in on her midday sort of thing. So we phoned her and said, we'll be down tomorrow. And we just stopped and said, well, where should we stay? Well, we stayed at the Greenwood Tower in Port Hope in the good days of the Greenwood Tower. And then, well, the next morning, we had several hours to spend, so we said, well, let's just for fun, let's just look at properties. First place we went to was Long Brothers, and Frank Long was a neat man, and everything was so coincidental, but he said, well, my mother-in-law is selling her house on the Lakeshore Road, maybe you'd like that. We went right out there and saw it. We had no intention of buying a house when we left the city on that, on that morning, at least on the morning before, and we still had no plan, and we said, this is it, and we loved it, and so we bought it.
In 20 minutes.
In about 20 minutes. And as it turned out, Frank said, but we were under contract to the school boards in the city, and Frank said, well, don't worry, I'm sort of responsible for bringing over some people to work at one of the industries here, and I'll find a good tenant for you, which they did. So that was 1968. We moved here in 1969, and I started to teach school, having some illustrious students, like, for instance, Ted Walker. Said he was a funny kid, and he's still a funny guy, but there's another funny one, too, we'll get to. Smart though, but funny.
Our house was right beside, just directly east of Barraclough, it's right beside it.
That's right. And it was such a lovely little place. There was a school which had actually closed, but there was the church and some really nice neighbors. We had actually really fabulous neighbors. John Gruneval lived across the road from us, and there was the Wesleyville nursery, which most people haven't heard of, that was operating then. Anyway, so we moved there in 1969, and we'd still be there probably. But Hydro was buying all the land around us, and ultimately we were surrounded, and so we sold, and we did all right, and so on, and we moved to a marsh-built house up at Bunker Hill, and that was 35 plus years ago, but we'd still be in Wesleyville. It was such a lovely community. And when we first moved there, anyway, and my son, who is still here, is the member of the family who was born when we were here, or in that house rather. Our oldest was born in the city, and our youngest was born when we were at Bunker Hill. But the story about Christian, who's sitting to my right here, is interesting because he was due to be born in the middle of September. And then we went to one of the Sculthorpe end of the summer square dances and danced very vigorously, and he was born the next day. And that's a true story. Anyway, and he's been dancing ever since, actually, dancing and playing. So we moved to Bunker Hill, and as I say, the house was, and we lived right next door to Jane there. And we, the house was a marsh house, but it was owned early on by, of course, William Hunt, who was the great Farini, and he owned that house as well as other houses. And he was the one, I am told, by a gentleman named Chris Anderson, who was actually a relative of the Andersons that owned it later on, that he could remember the great big locust trees that we still have most of, circling the property, that Mr. Hunt, as he called it, actually planted those, and that was 110 years ago. And one of them actually perished on the 27th of July this year. It was a direct hit by lightning, and it was the one nearest to the house, so it fell on part of the house too. But anyway, but oh, the CP, oh yeah, because nobody's mentioned the days of the CP rail plan. They were in the early 70s. They were there was a plan to CP rail was going to transport Metro Toronto's garbage forever to the Wesleyville site, and you can imagine how well that sat with the folks that were there, especially those who were dynamos, like A.K. Sculthorpe, for instance. And so she marshaled a group, and Jane McCall, who was Kip Reeves' daughter, the late Jane, and I found ourselves running for council. We went to a meeting at the Sculthorpe House, and everybody was saying, oh yeah, it's a terrible idea, and blah, blah, blah. And before we knew it, we were candidates for office. And because if you knew AK, she could talk the birds out of the trees. She was wonderful. But anyway, so both Jane and I ran, and much to our surprise, I mean, I was a new guy. I'd only been here for 5 years. Jane, of course, was from the area. And we both won. We both got on the council. And ultimately, that plan was voted down. And there were some wonderful, I haven't looked at this map here, but there were some funny things that happened at some of the public meetings. I can remember somebody from CP Rail saying, well, there weren't any houses that were affected. And so I went up and looked at the map, and they hadn't taken note of our house and the Bearclaw house and the other ones across the road and everything. So, but anyway, so Jane and I were not terribly prominent councillors probably, but at least we were there when that was voted down, and really the thanks go to Mrs. Sculthorpe, who
And many other people.
well, yeah, but she,
And Sanford tonight was saying, you know, we should have had Sanford's great-grandfather, my great-grandfather. We would have never seen REM, we would have never seen CP Rail. They would have just dealt with it. But I remember nights sitting around with Ken Ashby and a few of those other guys saying, you know, let them just try to come to Hopetown. And they're going to have a war on their...
I think there would have been some tar and feathers.
Well, it's really fascinating
We're all
because
done.
we did a workshop out at the Canton Municipal Hall on the Wesleyville area in the fall, and we were talking about land uses and creating a special study there. And I went out during the break, and there at the back of the hall was the CP Rail dump plan, and I brought back in.
oh yeah.
Louise, it was quite funny, wasn't it? To have, Brennan got mentioned once or twice,
Yeah.
so.
Yeah, but people have forgotten about that thing back in the 70s, and it was a threat. And
I have to go, but tell them how you almost burnt down Wesleyville.
oh yeah. Yeah, thank you, Kristen.
Well, I was, had just moved and had this new baby that was only a month old, and I thought, well, you know, it'd be nice to put a little garden, but there's all this long grass on it, and I thought, well, maybe I could just burn it off. So I did, except I had no idea how quickly fire can spread coming from a 14th floor apartment in Toronto. And I didn't know what to do. And we had a phone, but the phone had 14 people on this line. And you all had your own ring. I don't know if anybody remembers that. But, and if you were talking on the phone, it would, and people would pick up, and the power would drop, you know, the volume would keep dropping so you could hardly hear. But I didn't know what to do, so I got on the phone, and sure enough, I guess it was the Thorndikes got hold of my message, my frantic message, and in no time at all, there they were in their pickup trucks with
Dinners and
with axes, and they were all down, and that's how I met so many of my neighbors all at one time.
The crazy city woman who tried to burn the place down.
It spread tremendously.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, almost
Grass
to
fires.
this very house there. But the Outrits lived in the Y house, and they were wonderful. Len Outred had the most wonderful market garden, and there were all sorts of wonderful things. He would take us, I remember him taking me and the kids, the little ones, they were, I don't know, 4 and maybe 8 or so, out smelt fishing at night, and there was a road that went straight, almost straight down from their place, just a dirt road, down to Lake Ontario. And of course we had to go at night because we had to use flashlights, and that was wonderful. But I remember him telling me that that young couples used to go down there and park along that road. And he told me one day, Jane, that, no, not you, but that Debbie and John had gone down that road and they got stuck. And about midnight, they were knocking on Len's door. He had to get his tractor and pull them back out.
But they've been married for many, many,
Oh.
many years.
So after, yeah.
Afterwards.
And but I remember going out, and there were all sorts of wonderful things out there way back. I remember Len and Ethel taking us out picking morels, which of course change every year. They're never in the same place. And thimbleberries, and these great big fat thimbleberries that were wild all out there. So, and there was wild asparagus round, and yeah, it was a wonderful.
It was a
time.
wonderful, yeah.
Mhm.
And Christian loved the place. He always said he was going to come back and buy it after we had sold, and he brought one of his friends down, and he was going to show them the place, and it was gone. Not only was it gone, it looked as if it had never been there. It was like the Romans at Carthage, as if they didn't want
Yeah.
anybody to ever live there again. And there hasn't been anybody there.
They
But-
demolished on weekends.
Did they really?
Yeah.
Quickly.
Nobody knew.
Anyway, it was just a great place, and we'd still be there, but Hydro bought us out.
Sue, could I mention one further thing?
Yes, certainly, I think you might spark someone else to
Sure.
speak.
Actually, Port Britain, the name of Port Britain should be Britton.
Oh.
Mr. Marsh brought a guy to work on his shipbuilding and worked for him, and his name was Jeremiah Britton, and that's what Port Britain got its name from. But then they went to the British spelling as being Britain from Britain, but it should have been Britton.
So French instead of British.
This gentleman came in, I think he was some kind of a, well, I guess a half-assed doctor or something, and that was his, but that's, Catherine Tozer and I are, been working on this for quite a while, because she didn't believe me that, she'd heard about the Britain name, and when I showed her this, well, she said the proof, anybody wants to look at this, you'll see a lot of important people of Hope Township that tickled a little bit, I think, maybe, so. And one further thing I'd like to say, when I was a boy growing up on the Lakeshore, every August, September was the greatest time of the year for us, because R.E. Sculthorpe, to me, these boys' grandfather, run a car dealership right over here, and every year there was a certain date you could show the new cars. He'd get them in before that. They all went out to the farm to be stored till that day. Man, us young punks in Port Britain, we see every new car. And I still remember a '57 Chev. It's still one of my favorite cars. I can still see that thing sitting there. I could take you right to the spot. And we couldn't get only so close. He would say, nope, that's far enough, boys. But, man, that was something to see those cars come out there.
Well,
Yeah, that was
you
an
know,
important
touring
comment.
on Lakeshore Road is another thing that so many people do because of the beauty of it. And there's people here who, they just, I'm sure in this room, who just go for a regular drive or bike ride or even walk along Lakeshore Road just because it's so beautiful. Louise, you were involved with the Ragnar Relay in 2013, yeah, and every one of about almost without exception, every one of the 1,200 runners who came into Wesleyville at the exchange point said, this is one of the most beautiful routes that I have ever run. And so I think that's one of the real advantages of it. I think there must be other people who have stories. We still have a little bit of time.
Robert.
Let's go for it.
Robert?
Sure. So I thought I'd start at the Wesleyville Church because that's what this organization is all about, the Village of Wesleyville and the church. And while our family didn't go to Wesleyville Church, there were 3 events at the church that are prominent in my, childhood memory. The first one, which wasn't that popular with me, were the piano recitals, because I also was a student of Mrs. Nichols. But unlike Barb Croft, I didn't pursue it to its end and make my career out of it, which she has, and I have to, hats off to her for doing that. But I do remember, playing for whatever number of years it was as a young child, riding up and down the Lakeshore Road to go get my weekly lesson, and then playing once a year, doing the recitals at the church. And the other 2 things were much more fun. They were the strawberry festivals in the strawberry season, which we would go to, and of course we'd always have to wait for Dad to come home from work, so they would have sittings, and so you'd sit in the church until you were called down, and we were in a later sitting because we'd had to wait for Dad, and so I can remember sitting in the church waiting, and then having a delicious meal downstairs. And sometimes we'd go out and play while it was going to be a long wait. Mom would say we'd go out and play. And if you are a young child playing around the Wesleyville Church, there isn't a lot of level ground between the steps and the road. Like you're playing on this bank, and I remember that very prominently. And the other thing, when we were really small, they used to also have in the fall what they referred to as a fowl supper. So it was a turkey dinner. And again, there'd be tickets sold and you'd go. So, and I really enjoyed those events. Childhood memories, preschool, both Mom and Dad, but Mom, because she was looking after us, became great friends of Florence and Harold Reeve, Kip Reeve, and so we would go down there and we would have tea and cinnamon toast, and I've never met anyone who could make cinnamon toast the way Mrs. Reeve could. She also made wonderful butter tarts, but cinnamon toast was what we got the most often. Cinnamon toast and tea, which we loved. And we remember going to the Austin's farm to watch them shear sheep. One year, we'd go to the Bees farm to buy vegetables, and then Mr. B would also bring vegetables along in his pickup truck on his way to town and stop and sell them to Mom. And then there was a day that the Bees barn burnt down, and I remember being in my parents' bedroom in our house in Port Britain and seeing the fire truck going by, and being told that it was Mr. B's barn that was on fire, and the fire truck would probably get there too late anyway, which it did. And that also was a time there were 26 people on the party line that Mom and Dad had at that time. So, we had...
There was a fire call, right? Wasn't there?
Yeah, there was a certain fire call, and
Five rings.
Five rings.
Oh,
Okay.
really? That was fire.
Yeah, we had a phone that looked like a dial phone, but it wasn't. But it looked like that. But most people still had the one on the wall with the speaker and the handheld thing and the crank, right? So,
and everybody could listen in.
oh, that's it. Yeah. My mother's family were from Long Island, so they would phone. She would phone her parents once a week. We can only get our kids in university to do the same. We text us instead. Anyway, and that was a question: could you get enough power to get through to, the exchange to get to New York? So, the road was not paved when we were young. It was a gravel road, and it always got interesting in the spring. And I can remember in the spring walking with Mom to the Reeves and walking back. It's only a half a mile or so, and the Bests had gotten stuck and in the mud. They tried to get to town, and they were getting themselves out with the help of lumber and jacks and whatnot. And I guess they finally did. Before I can remember, because Dad worked at his father's dealership as a salesman in those days in the 50s. So this would have been the very early 50s. Apparently they had an old used truck that probably was dated from the late 30s, because it had wooden floorboards in it. And Dad used it in the spring to drive back and forth because he didn't want to get a good new car stuck in the mud. But the story is he would put it in first gear and there were gaps between the floorboards that the mud would splash up. So he didn't want to get his shoes and his pants legs dirty, so he put his feet on the dashboard, have it in first gear, and control the speed with the hand throttle that the cars had in those days. And he'd get in and out. So that's how he got to work and back. And then there's another story that Dr. Ketchum, who was the headmaster at TCS at that same time, in that era, had a friend of his who said you invited him to come smelt fishing, which happens late April, early May. There used to be runs then, the smelt run. But he said the best place to fish was at the mouth of the stream that flows through Port Britain. But the only way to get out there is in a canoe. So Dr. Ketchum apparently accepted the invitation, and they got in the canoe, Port Hope, paddled out to Port Britain to the beach, fished. I don't know whether how many fish they got, but anyway, they paddled back. And then a few weeks later, Dr. Ketchum learned that Bob Sculthorpe drove back and forth every day. Might have been slow, but he got to work. So he said he was frustrated having paddled. Anyway. So that's a story. One of the things when we were growing up were the steam engines that pulled the trains, and they were different than what we have today, for sure. And in that time when there's just a sea of mud, Mum used to take us, and we'd go into the Port Up station where they still did a lot of shunting. We watched the steam engines shunt. When I say we, Jim,
Yeah, we would watch, and they had because they shunted trains there all the time, and they had a water filling station, and we would watch the trains, and Mum would talk to the engineers, and they pull up to the water, and they drop the water into the steam engines, and steam would be flying everywhere. It was just the best thing for a young kid to watch those steam engines. And to this date, I know that if we heard a steam engine 3 miles away blow its whistle, we'd know that's a steam engine. And there aren't many doing it now, but Sanford would be the same. If you know what a steam engine sounds like, you can hear it coming. And I'll just break in a minute for those steam engines. R.E., our grandfather, the wooden bridges that go over the railway at Dickinson Side Road and then further west. My grandfather, as a kid, used to jump off those bridges onto the tops of boxcars and then go up, maybe to Wesleyville and jump off. But you could jump on and off those cars because they were going up the grade. And that was what you did when you were 14 and you needed to get to Wesleyville and you didn't want to walk.
Now you can't toboggan.
No.
Yeah.
So anyway, another aspect of the steam engines is when you're driving west, just before you get to the top of the Port Britain Hill, they would, at this time of year when it's cold, they would put up a white plume because it was the steam that was predominantly going, unless they just shoveled on a whole lot of coal. And if you watch the westbound freight trains heading along just at the bottom of the ridge, you could actually see this plume going along to the west for about 3 or 4 miles, past behind the Wesleyville church and on. You just speed there. Mum used to point this out to us that you stop here on a cold winter day and you can just watch the trains go by. And so it's a different experience you don't see today. The fields were the grain was cut with a binder, and there were sheaves. And Sanford, you probably were involved in that. I remember some of them. Some of the fields had the sheaves were then stooped, and then there would be the thrashing machine, and every mixed farm had a straw pile in the middle of the barnyard that the cattle would eat around as the winter. And it was just a scene that you don't see now at all, but was very common when we were growing up. The Port Britain stream would flood every spring. It was just ferocious. The water would come down, and you can. That's whole part of the legacy, or part of the reason for the Ganaraska Conservation Authority and the planting of the Ganaraska Forest was, the flooding. But we as children could see the very end before the trees had grown high enough that they were really impacting the level of flooding. So I remember going to the Ashby's house in Port Britain to watch TV. We could watch cartoons. I think we watched more snow than images, but compared to today's cartoon. But it was fascinating sitting on the floor of their house watching TV, which it sounds so crazy in this day. Ashby's, the farm equipment dealership, was an institution in all of the township. But here's a picture that Sanford has from when they opened their new building. I believe it's here, Sanford, that came. And it's predominantly, it's got the big sign, Ken Ashby. They lost their dealership with John Deere. They continued in business. And there was Jim and I were farming at the time. There was a period of about 5 years when they were actively in business, and there was no sign anywhere on the premises as to what the business was named. And people would come along the Lakeshore Road and ask where Ken Ashby's farm equipment was. And Jim and I, well, it's right there. Well, how do I know? You can't find a parking place. Why do they need a sign? So busy.
I think we should mention too, Robert, that business was probably the largest grossing business in Hope Township
Yeah.
for a number of years.
Yeah.
They supplied the tobacco industry with irrigation pipe, and you guys would
All
remember
the
the
chemicals,
trucks leaving
yeah.
with that
Oh,
aluminum
yeah.
pipe on. And being friends of Dave's, he'd always get me down to help him load it. And, I could take you to every tobacco farm in the north end. Dave and I used to like that because they had some pretty good looking daughters in that part of the We didn't begrudge going out there for a while.
But loading wasn't as much fun.
No, more fun out there.
Looking at the Port Britain School, when I started, there were 27 students. There was a student in every desk in the building. When I left, they were down to 11, I think. So it was quite a change. When I started school, the grades 1 and 2 finished school at 2:30 in the afternoon, and then the later grades finished at 4. And Earl Ashby and I walked home along Lakeshore Road. It's about a mile. And I remember my mother pointing out to me that I got home, what had taken me so long. I said, well, what do you mean? We're just walking along. Well, it took you an hour and a half to travel 1 mile. But we stop and look at things and, talk about it, what we saw, and we had a great time. It was good fun. Heather was asking me recently, my wife Heather, about, the wild roses that are like the Alberta wild rose. I said, oh yeah, they grow along Lakeshore Road. And, we went out and I knew exactly where
They aren't there now because of that flail mower, just seems to knock them all down.
2 years ago.
Sarah here to speak on that.
The first year I was at the school, the well froze. It had a hand pump on it. And so the boys in grade 8 had to go to the farm next door. They went west, not east, Sanford, and got a couple of pails of water so
Yeah,
I could
the
have a drink of
towels.
water at lunch. It was closer.
Yeah.
They had a coal furnace in the center. So once you got to grade 4, you got to help stoke the furnace. It was interesting, the fire went out Friday night after school, and the temperature of the school dropped to whatever the outside temperature was, and the caretakers would come in and lay a fire in the furnace, and then the teacher got there, Miss Brett, got there early on Monday morning to light the fire, and you could wear your winter coat until morning recess, until the temperature got up to something reasonable. So, a bit of a change in the sort of infrastructure around schools. And picking team, we used to play baseball. It was really the only organized thing we did. We had a bat and a baseball and a few gloves. And when you're down to 11 or 14 kids in the school, whether your team is likely to win or not depends on which grade 1 student you get on your team. There's a hope that they'll catch the ball and throw it, or no hope. So there's that song about picking teams for basketball. Well, in that school with that number, when you were in grade 1, it was important. Peter Moore arrived one day with his horse, rode up and tied his horse to a post and was there all day, and when I went home at the end of the day. The paving of the Lakeshore Road occurred when we were there, and I found it fascinating because they didn't arrive with asphalt trucks the way they with it all pre-mixed. They produced a windrow of gravel, and then they spread it across the road and sprayed the asphalt, and worked until they worked it over the other side, and then they spread it out and rolled it. And so it went on for about 3 days to pave a road 2 miles long, a portion of 2 miles long. So that's it for the school. I remember being a little older and helping Charlie Baton. Charlie and his wife used to live in the house that Amanda is now living in. And I would help him plant and also harvest his potatoes. And everybody bought potatoes from the Batons. They just went in and bought. There were all kinds of stories, but I helped Charlie harvest his potatoes and put them in his cellar. And to this day, when I go to a grocery store to buy potatoes, I pick up that bag of potatoes, and it has to smell like their cellar. And if it doesn't, and because I know they're off, go find another skid. It has to smell just like that. It's stuck with me. How? Where? Just south and west of the barn on that flat field. We had a lot of picnics as a family on Wesleyville Beach. There was discussion about people going down there, young teenagers going down in the evening, but there were a lot of family picnics that we had on the Edgar Bearclaw farm. We drive down, and it was pastured so that the grass was very short. It was great to play on. I remember the older teenagers, probably more like Jane Crowley's age, playing Capture the Flag. Yeah, there was some quite lively competitions going on there.
Sunday school picnic is out there too.
Was it?
I don't remember that, but I'm sure it was. It was just a beautiful place. Bird watching at Willow Beach. I was one of the reluctant bird watchers at Willow Beach because I was, 3, 4, and 5, and I could never see these little birds like this. I could never get the binoculars to work, and what's more, the adults wanted me to stand still and not talk. So I was not an enthusiastic birder at that age. So that's it. So Jim and I farmed for 15 years between mid-70s to the end of the
77 and 90.
And at that point, Hydro had taken over the Wesleyville lands. It changed the nature of the community, but I can still remember driving an open tractor down Lakeshore Road from one field to another and smelling the lilacs in May. It's just an incredible, with everything else that's going on around you and trying to get the crop in and everything, and you just get this wonderful smell of the lilacs. It's just incredible. And I remember moving cattle along the road because we had cattle at 2 different farms, and we would lead them up and down the road, and it could make for interesting times at times, but we did it.
I'm just going to interject with a cattle story and Lakeshore Road, if I may.
Sure.
They used to fence the Lakeshore Road to keep the cattle out of the field and onto the road originally. So the cattle pastured on the road, and everybody's cattle pastured together, and they had a way of identifying them. I think they took an old shotgun, brass shotgun shell that was empty, and they put holes in the ear, or took a chunk out of it, and 2 chunks was so and so. Anyway, my grandfather was quite a character. Well, one day he and a couple of other guys at school went out at lunchtime, and there were some cattle pasturing along the side of the road. So they thought, aha. In the Port Britain schoolhouse, there are doors that come in the back of the schoolhouse to the lower level. So in came the cattle during lunch hour from the roadside into the bottom of the school. And the doors were shut. I think class started and the cows started to make a noise. The teacher went down and school was shut down for the rest of the day. So they got the afternoon off. So that's a story from RE. Whether it's true or not, but I bet it is. But
My family wouldn't be involved.
oh no!
They were too busy with their whiskey. They could tell you who owned the cattle, too.
Yeah, they would have been. But that's a cattle story for the Lakeshore Road.
There's 2 other quick things. One, when we were farming, it was used. The Lakeshore Road was used as a set for Degrassi High, and it was during harvest, so we were traveling back and forth with gravity boxes of grain and the combine to move fields and in and around the, film truck and everything else. It was an interesting couple of days while they were doing it, but it was good. And the last thing that Jim was talking about, ways to get a day off school, was Harold Reeve told us this, Skip Reeve, when we were still at the school, and that was that one year the students, he didn't say whether when he was a student, I suspect it probably was, but you let that out of the bag, went down to the woodlot that's just south of the schoolhouse and in the spring and dug up a bunch of leeks and came and ate them. And of course then they came back to the school and it reeked of leeks. And finally the teacher said, I can't stand the smell any longer. And this class was over for the day. And he said, the crazy thing was he only had to take one bite of a leek. And he wouldn't have noticed it, but we got the day off. They got the day off school.
Still lots of leaks in that place.
Oh, there are.
Yeah, there are.
I
They're
harvested
wonderful.
School's gone, but the leaks are still
Yeah.
there. So.